you're gonna get 4 things out of this presentation. The first one would be a case study of a small project, a pet project that I have done a year ago, about a year and a half in Makimo. The second thing is some insights about the discipline of programming. The third one would be a plot twist. And at the end, I would invite you to something. And that's what you're gonna get from this presentation. Let's start with the case study. Whose name is it anyway? This is closely related to the television program, an improvisation program. Whose line is it anyway? Does anyone know about this program? Yeah, if you like improvisation on the scene, you should completely check it out, because this program is very good, and it sets pretty much the baseline standard for improvisation on the stage. And I copied it, I changed it, and this is whose name is it anyway. But what it is? Well, it's something that helps me to check if I am Michał at makimo.pl on Gmail. This tool will allow to check me whether I am what is my username on other services as well. For example, on Jira. And here is one of the typical uses for that. So you set the username on one of the services that are in here. So this is the email that I have, and I'm asking for what is my username on Jira, and this is this long string of characters. Basically, it's an identity microservice. It answers the question for one that calls themselves this and this on, for example, on email, what's their username on Slack. And it helps everybody match their identities in different tools and services that we use every day. For example, matching between Jira and GitHub, matching between email and GitHub, between Slack and Jira as well. And this mapping is very simple. So I had a few ideas how could I do that. Well, the simplest one is basically a JSON file. I mean, this is the simplest API possible. You have one file, you put it on the server, you can download it and then process it in order to get some information out of it. And I thought that I don't like JSON, but I like YAML. And YAML is a more structured format, and this is the file that describes all the usernames and all of the services that are in here. As you can see, for this this mark on the second line describes one identity, and under it you have services and usernames on these services. We do not have any distinction which of these is more preferred. There is no unique identifiers for that because that's not needed, and that basically explains the whole idea of this microservice. So yeah, should we do a simple application? The answer is yes. In what technology? In some technology that I know and I like to use, and I wanted to choose this to see that this technology, after a few years, how has it changed. And the chosen technology for me was Laravel. It is a PHP framework, and you are, most of you that are backend developers are thinking right now, okay, he is going to do a monolithic application that will be determined by how the framework goes, but no. I actually wanted to try something else, and I wanted to learn a little bit of how to implement domain-driven design in such a small application so that it would not be too much work for me, but yet in such way that that would be easy to test, that would be easy to maintain. And I tried this. I tried to do this. So at the beginning of the project, I've figured out a set of conventions, a set of rules that I would like to follow. The first one is very important, and I will describe it in detail in a little bit. And the first one is that tests communicate purpose of the code. What does it mean? I will show you. The second one is that we will separate into a domain logic, into infrastructure logic, and application code. And the reason for that is so that Laravel will not determine how I should write my application. It will be a client of my application. And I will use architecture decision ledger. I'm not going to cover this here in this talk, but it's also a good practice. So these are the conventions. In other places you could use also the term architectural drivers for that, but I've used conventions because they are in relation to architectural drivers. Many architectural drivers are set by the environment that our application is in. So yeah, here's a set of conventions for my application. And how does it work? Well, if tests are communicating the purpose of the application and everything can be seen in them, so let's look at the tests. Here you have all of the tests for this simple application. There are 18 tests in the application, and I would like to show you basically a few examples that will walk you through all of the code without looking at the implementation of the code. The first one, this test, querying an existing user identity for a known service, for example, Gmail, returns username of that service. This is the most important use case for this application, and it's under the domain. So it checks if whether our domain code really returns what should return. After that, we have 3 tests for basically edge cases for this domain. So we are looking for data that we do not have in our database, or for a service that is not known because the code is separated actually from the persistence. We are looking for an identity that doesn't exist, and also we are looking for the identity for the same known service. And this 4th test probably might not be even included into this set of tests, because it serves no business value, because you are not going to check whether your own email is in the application. But I've put in here so that someone that looks at the code will see, okay, this is an edge case, this is how it's developed, and the interface won't change in this. The second suite of tests are for the infrastructure, and this is the YAML file repository, and this is basically our layer of persistence. And here are tests that described what this repository can do actually. So the first test is basically the most important one, and it repeats this one. Given a service name, for example Gmail, and then username, a matching identity can be found. And this is the use case for our persistence layer that checks whether it works. There are other cases, there are other edge cases, and as you can see, there is also a mention of cache, because this repository is also working with cache, so the file isn't loaded each time you run a request to the service, but it's precompiled to a PHP file, and this cache speeds up the running of the service. And at the end, you have one other edge case. If the file does not exist, a query throws an exception. And as you can see, all of the tests that are described here are very literate in a sense that they actually described what you should expect from this domain code or from the infrastructure code. And for me, very important thing is to write tests so that one that can read these tests will be able to get a grasp of the features that your code offers. And even more, if you look at the first test, so basically this one, querying an existing user identity for a known service, returns username of that service. This is an example that shows you how to use this service. So you basically initialize the query service with some repository that serves for the persistence layer, and after that you call this method. What is the name of? You provide for example, an email, a service that this email relates to, and the service that is asked. And you expect that this value will be set to something that is in the test case. And if you look at this test and the other one, this is testing behavior of that code. This is not testing implementation of what was it done, but this is actual usage. You could copy that code and use it in your code that is using this service. And this is one of the most important things in testing. You should always test behaviors of the code that you are testing, not the implementation. This is why I'm not showing you any implementation of that code. You should be able to get all of the expectations, all of the interface, just from reading tests. Yeah, for the infrastructure, this can become a little bit tricky because we have these two tests. YAML file persists in the cache, and updating YAML file updates the cache. So in order to do that, we need to do a little bit of trickery. Okay. We basically copy a file, set its modified time to 1 second ago by using touch command, and we check whether actually the file access time was set to last second. This is all arrangement of the test. Why do we do it so? Because on some implementations there might not be any access time, or on some funky file system. If this test fails on this line, we are sure that we shouldn't test on this particular machine, because that doesn't make any sense for us. But, and that's more important, we use this file repository, and we are actually trying to read the file. And when we read the file, we are checking whether the file was accessed. Because we are doing that, we are actually checking the behavior of our software. I was thinking about maybe I should, for example, return some flag, whether the file was loaded at the time of calling the load method of that or not, but that actually would be leaking implementation details, and that's something you shouldn't do. You shouldn't basically change the interface of your code in order to match the test, and that's something that is also very important in that. So yeah, it's better to check the code by actually creating a file and doing all the steps that are required to check whether this file was accessed by this code, and not looking at any output from this code. We are basically running a separate check for that, whether our action was made. And this is also a code that tests whether after updating the file, after changing the file, the file is going to return other value. And this test is very important, because if you are going to push the YAML file to the production server, then it should change at the time, so the next request should return changed values. And this is the same trickery. So you are basically copying the files, setting times on them in order to see whether this update will also change the version that was stored in cache, and it should be. So this is another test that checks that checks the oh no, this is the original test that was in the domain of this application. So yeah, and this is also the test that is actually testing the other part of this application. So it's testing the application, the API that is accessing the query service. And here you basically are using calls to the API in order to check whether the values match. So as you can see, we were doing 3 tests on 3 different layers. One, the persistent layer; second one, the domain layer; and third one, the API layer, that are checking the same thing, but they are doing it in completely different manner, just because to maintain separation between these 3 pieces of code. So yeah, this is the separation, that domain is separated from API. There are some exceptions to that, but I'm not going to go into this, just for simplicity's sake. The second one is that infrastructure handles persistence, and that's all. And the application uses a well-defined interface from the domain, and everything is connected by dependency injection. Why should we separate that? Because the domain code is separate from anything. You can replace the framework, basically. You can replace anything else, persistence layer, and the domain stays as it is. Infrastructure is also injected by the dependency injection as a persistence implementation for that application. And application depends only on domain, on its services, in order to get the information that it needs. And here is the constraint that is satisfied. So that framework is a client of the domain, not the owner of that code. So, summary. Tests. They document behavior, and for me there are three things that are important in that. The first one is that you shouldn't leak the behavior of your code into the tests. There shouldn't be any implementation details that are in there. 2. Put the most important tests first in your test file, because if someone is going to read them, then you are basically showing them what they should know about your code. And the third one is language, but the language of the descriptions matter in order to show the people how your code can be used and what are the features in there. The second one is simplicity. It's nearly the domain-driven design, but for simplicity I just have removed a few steps. And that's a balance that you should try to strike, whether the application is easy. This application took me 40 hours to do, with all of the tests and all of the working on that, and I should not complicate it just for its complication's sake. And the third one, separation. Clear concepts make clear code, and that is something that I would like you also to remember after this talk. Yeah, so for the last part and plot twist in this talk, basically this is a rule that says so. Acquaint yourself with the idea that any program you wrote will be studied by others. And it's your responsibility to teach them to orient themselves in your code. Each program constitutes an act of teaching. From the rules for young programmers, the 12th rule. And I would like to invite you to the rules of young programmers, because this is something that I started writing some time ago. There are quite a few roles in there already, but I've made this repository public, so anybody can basically join in, and if you have your own rules that would help young programmers become better, then please make a pull request for that, because we are here to learn and we are here to teach each other to become a better software craftsman. Thank you.